what's not necessary. I don't think people like, do you need this person to meet every person in your company? Probably not, right?
In this video, we are gonna talk about the AI interview loop that actually predicts the performance of the candidate. So, Darius, most companies that we talk have 3 to 5 rounds, even more, in their AI interview processes. So that's too many, that's few.
uh,
Are the wrong questions in three? How that looks like?
Generally, we're telling folks it's too many. The reason there's too many, I think if you're thinking about startups, funded startups, as well as mid-sized companies, you are accustomed to having your pick of the litter when you're in a hiring process. AI, the talent is in such demand that you really don't, it's the opposite, right? Like a good candidate has his or her pick of the litter as it relates to what job they may want to take. So you can believe that if you are interviewing quality AI talent, they have options. And because they have options, the longer you stretch out your hiring phase, the more likely it is that they're going to choose another option, right? So having fewer rounds is always better. And I think what companies have to take into account is not just fewer rounds, but what are you asking of the candidate? If you're asking for 3 technical tests, I'm exaggerating here, but this is really taking the time of someone who likely has a full-time job already. So what is their capacity to then be able to do that amount of work to get the job? So this comes back to how competitive is your process relative to their other options. Their other 2 options are work somewhere else, right, that is recruiting them, or stay at their same company. And so the more frictionless you make the process, the better. But within that, while you do reduce the number of rounds, there still has to be the vetting process to determine whether the person is a good technical fit and whether the person is a good cultural fit, right? And you can do that. You can do that in fewer rounds. I just think that in traditional hiring processes, companies have had the flexibility to extend the processes very long because most job types, the supply of the talent is much greater than the demand. In the case of AI, the demand for the talent is much greater than the supply.
In that case, what does that actually cost for a company?
Well, the reality is, one, when it comes to building and deploying AI solutions. So if you're a startup and your core product is an AI solution, you've got to ship, right? There's definitely a cost to being slow to market. Now, some would argue there could be benefits to not being the first entrant to the market, but if you're not able to hire the talent that can drive forward your product roadmap, the cost is lost revenue, right? The cost could also be missed milestones. So thinking again, funded startups, right? You make a commitment to investors to have your product reach a certain level of maturity by a certain point. And if you're not meeting that, one of the ways that investors are evaluating whether they feel comfortable putting capital behind a founding team is whether you can acquire talent, right? So it's one thing to have a great technical co-founding team. It's another thing to continue to scale up and find new talent that can continue to push that product forward. And this is like beyond, hey, we got a great network, right? Because at some point your network is limited. And in your network, do you think you have the best people in the world? So beyond that, what is your capability to acquire talent? Which inside of that, your hiring process plays a part, right? So you don't want your hiring process to dissuade candidates from joining. And again, coming back to the cost piece, it could cost funding that's needed to run the business. It could cost sales because of a delayed product roadmap. And then if you hire the wrong person, right, because the top candidates decided to opt out of the process, now you've got someone sitting on payroll that's actually not generating ROI to the team.
Yeah. So, how or what does the love that actually works looks like? Like, what culture or how does our AI work?
Yeah, so I think as I mentioned previously, you've got to understand whether the fit is a cultural fit or not. You've got to understand whether the person is technically capable or not. And then I would say that those are the two things. And then you got to understand what your budget is, which is a question. It's funny because a lot of people are like, hey, we need a senior machine learning engineer. Okay, we can find you that, right? Someone who's really good. How much have you allocated to that person? We don't know yet. Well, we better figure that out. So having those things understood up front, it's going to save the hiring team a lot of time. A lot of people like to put out jobs without any compensation attached. But what happens is you end up interviewing everybody who thinks they're interested in the job, right? And what happens if your compensation band simply does not fit within the band of 40% or 80% of the people that you are interviewing? Well, those people aren't going to accept the job anyway, right? So establishing a compensation band is going to be one really important thing to do up front. And then understanding how do we accomplish this process as quickly as possible, right? So using basketball terminology here, I could dribble the ball a million times before I go to the basket and try to score, right? Or I could just dribble the ball twice and get there in less time and spend less energy. The idea is that we spend less time and energy on things that don't matter and focus very critically on what are the things that we need from this person, what do we expect them to ship, how can we look at their previous experience to determine whether they can ship that particular thing, and then do they fit within our culture? So could they work within a startup? Do they have a passion for what we are actually building? Do we need them to have a passion for what we are building? Maybe the answer is no to that. Maybe you're just willing to write a really big check. Probably a more risky route to go. And then is their experience more big company where everything needs to be laid out for this person, right? So I think having those conversations and then understanding what other things, what's our tech stack? Let's go source candidates that have experience with that so their onboarding process isn't prolonged, right? We need this person to be high ROI as soon as possible, right? So we want to reduce that ramp period. And because we provide our clients a guarantee that this person is going to work out as part of our hiring process, we're like, look, if you haven't defined these things, let's do that now because we are aligned in terms of making sure that we find the right person, not just a person.
So, if someone is watching this video and wants to rethink their AI interview process, what's the first that they should take?
Yeah, what's not necessary? I don't think people like, do you need this person to meet every person in your company? Probably not, right? And people who are interviewing probably don't even want to. Let me not be so cavalier. But what would I rethink? I would rethink, am I very clear about what this person is going to earn? Right? Am I clear about whether this person needs to have a passion for what we do? In many cases, that's going to be true, especially if you can't pay the person what someone in big tech is going to pay. Do they have the technical skill set? Let me not just pull an old job description or a job description I found online. Let me run it through our CTO or our VP of engineering to determine whether what we've outlined is actually correct. Things like that seem very small, but they actually have a huge implication, and it's really reducing the headache that hiring managers and the recruiting team have because your pipeline looks good, right? It's just like marketing and sales. Marketing is building awareness around the product itself and attracting people. But when marketing passes a lead to sales and all of the leads are trash, sales is, I don't want to call this person, I don't want to talk to this person. But if sales knows, like, this is a really good conversation. This is someone who is likely to be a customer. Yeah. Of course they're going to take the call, right? It's the same thing in recruiting, right? If your pipeline of candidates is weak, when you ask the hiring manager, hey, will you interview this candidate? They're going to come into the interview more excited if they know that your pipeline is good. Yeah. So thinking about it in that term, I think it makes it a much more simplified process, but also high value.
So, if you are building an AI tool right now, join to tesorAI.com and start a conversation with us.